because
All right, I think
we
we'll
might
get
start
started.
seeing them
Well, thanks everybody for coming.
January into February.
I am just going to talk a little bit today about some of the shorebirds that we have here. Obviously, not all of them, but talk a little bit in general about shorebird populations, and then talk about some of the focal species that we try to protect during certain periods of time when they're here. I'll talk a little bit about how to identify those focal species, talk a little bit about conservation, things we do on the island as well to protect shorebirds. And I'll turn it over to Cindy after that, and she'll talk a little bit more about protection measures and things like that we do here as well. If you have any questions, I think we'll keep this pretty informal. I think just ask questions as we go, rather than, we don't have to do some Q&A at the end or anything. So if something piques your interest, just raise your hand and we'll talk about it then, rather than kind of wait till the end. Okay, so back in 2019, this big report came out. You may have seen it. It was the State of the Birds report. This is something that comes out every several years, and it's just a conglomeration of a bunch of bird studies, and they try to figure out the state of the birds, if you will, how certain species are doing. They use lots of different data and research out there to kind of compile all this. And this report basically said that since 1970, 2.9 billion birds have disappeared from the population. And that was due to a lot of different factors. But the three species that showed really heavy declines were your forest birds, 22%, shorebirds were down 37%, and grassland birds have really taken the biggest hit, and their populations are down 53% in that time.
Chef, you want to be the
Forest birds, sure.
There it
his
goes.
assistant?
So,
You want him to stand
If
up?
you want to, sure, that's fine.
Push.
Just forward, yes, that'll work. So I kind of looked at some, and more specifically for some just certain species of shorebirds, I kind of looked at different research projects that kind of, and different surveys that projected population. And ruddy turnstone is a species, that's the picture here, that's a species that has shown steep decline since 1974, and that population has declined about 80%. Semi-palmated sandpipers is another species that has shown really steep declines. Red knots, everybody, we've talked about red knots a lot, and we'll talk about them again, but red knots have shown a 70 to 80% decline. Since the 80s, almost in a 20-year period, their population dramatically has decreased. There is some good news. American oyster catchers have actually shown an increase over the last 20 years or so. So not all shorebirds are declining. Some are showing some good increases in population, but a majority of them are in decline.
Aaron, how do you explain that the American oyster catchers have gone up?
It's a good question. I'm not really sure how to explain why oyster catchers might be going up. The only thing I can think of for them is because they are a beach nesting bird, opposed to some of these others that nest in the Arctic. That humans are, like shorebird stewardship programs and other things that are like signage and closing off nesting areas could be actually showing, help and allowing those species to actually increase their population. Species that nest in the Arctic, there's not much that we can do to protect breeding habitat on those species because there's really no people up there anyway where they're breeding. But so a lot of their, their problems are coming from in different places, potentially on their wintering grounds and things like that. So that it could just be as simple as humans are actually able to help protect those nests better because they're nesting on beaches where people are. Okay. So I found this other study. This was looking at declines in North American shorebirds. And this is just a paper that was published back in 2023. And it has some really interesting graphs about a bunch of different species and their population trends. Okay, Shep. So it looked at all of these different these species, and obviously, so the total percent change from 1980 to 2019, 0 basically is the black line. So anything below that is a species that's showing a negative or decreasing trend in their population. And anything above that line is showing an increasing trend. So as you can see, just to kind of reinforce the point, most of these species are declining. Okay, next one. This is basically a same graph, or it's a different graph, but from the same paper. Really just showing very similar things. But this is kind of looking at acceleration or deceleration of in a 3-generation period of birds. It's kind of confusing what that 3-generation period means. But essentially it's just looking at trends in a different way. And it's again, that it's just still showing that, that most of these species are declining. And then the last one, Shep, you can change the next slide. This is from a different a graph that shows the same species. It gives kind of their what their vulnerability or endangered status is based on the IUCN, and obviously it's showing again pretty much most of these species are declining. Okay, so all that to say, basically it's just showing you the same graph over and over by different people doing different research and just reinforcing that these birds are declining across across their ranges. So why do we need to protect these birds? Okay. So for one, habitat loss is a huge thing. This can be man-made, this can be natural habitat loss. So we see that here monthly. Our beach changes based on weather, storms, tides, things like that. So that's a natural thing. These birds have evolved over many thousands and thousands of years to adapt to the changing beach. The other is human-caused, more kind of development that changes, things putting hard structures along beaches that eliminates that dune habitat, and then sea level rise as well. As the sea level rises, that's just going to put more pressure on on these beach areas, which could increase erosion, which will then decrease habitat for these birds. Okay, next one. The other thing is disturbance. This is also a big problem as far as where we have a lot of birds on the beach. That's also where people want to be. So trying to be able to cohabitate with birds and people on the beach, it's just an education where most people just aren't aware what the birds are doing on the beach when they're here. And if they just kind of knew a little bit more about them, I think they would be able to respect the birds that are out there when they're also recreating on the beach. It can be done, it doesn't have to be an and or, it can be both ands. So that's kind of what we want to try to do. Dogs is another kind of disturbance factor that birds do see out on the beaches, as well as natural predators. We have crows and gulls out there. Those are probably the number one and two predators of our nesting shorebirds is those two. It's probably not coyotes, it's probably not bobcats. It's probably gulls and crows that are getting and eating most of the eggs and things that are of our birds on the beach. Okay, next one. And again, the next one is loss of food. That can kind of go a little bit with habitat loss and kind of the changing of habitat, but also the horseshoe crab harvesting. If you've seen that, it's been in the news. It's not as much lately, but it has. Red knots and other shorebirds rely a lot on horseshoe crab eggs during migration. This is a fat-rich source of food that they rely on to fatten up as they're moving, from wintering grounds to their breeding grounds. And there's been, horseshoe crabs are actually harvested for two reasons. One is they're used for bait for commercial fishing, and the other is for the biomedical industry, which they collect blood and they use in cancer research. A lot of those horseshoe crabs are released back out, but we don't know the fate of those, whether or not a lot of those are actually surviving once they're being released back out into the wild. Now, there's been a lot of work done on the biomedical field, and there is now places where they cannot harvest horseshoe crabs. There's even been work here in South Carolina that has limited that, and also up in other places up in the Northeast as well. So that's a plus. That there's a little bit there's protected areas for horseshoe crabs now where this isn't able to take place.
Aaron, can I ask you a question about that?
Yep.
Haven't they found a new way instead of using the blood from the horseshoe crabs for the diagnostics? Or that's just in the research?
The synthetic. I don't know.
Synthetic, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about the synthetic. I do know that they've kind of figured that out, but I don't know details about that.
Okay.
If anybody else does, they can. Yeah.
Well, I was a pathologist, and we used limulus lysate assays, which is the horseshoe crab enzyme assays, since the 1970s. And basically, during the enzyme detects, makes a reaction when it detects endotoxins. So anything that's injected into the human body basically will be exposed to a lysate assay to make sure that it's pure. And during COVID, with the ramp up of the vaccination production and all the people affected, we saw a really big drain on the availability of the lysate in assays. It's been used for, I was a pathologist for 40 years. We used them back in the old days. But there are several pharmaceutical companies that have developed a synthetic lysate that is been deemed equivalent by whoever does that, Food and Drug, or I don't know who it is. You probably know Nancy. But it is now, the synthetic is now available and is equivalent to the natural lysate.
Good.
But one of the biggest problems was when the vaccines were developed, that hadn't been approved as the equivalent.
Gotcha.
And so all the approved vaccines were approved on the basis of the natural lysate. So, there's been a back and forth going on. But there are several. I know Eli Lilly in Indiana, their Indianapolis campus is where a lot of that research was done. So they're out there.
Good. Thank you. Thanks for that. And lastly, hunting. You probably wouldn't think of people hunting shorebirds, and it doesn't happen here, but it does happen in other parts of the world. So there are places along a shorebird's migratory route where they're hunted sometimes heavily in certain cultures. So they're seeing pressures from all over the place and different things. Okay, next. So the one thing that we can do You know, we can't control natural storm events, you know, we really can't control hunting in other parts of the country, but things here, what we can do is we can look at and we can control kind of the disturbance. So when birds are here on Kiawah, the things that we can do is kind of control the disturbance aspect. So that's kind of what I'll talk a little bit now about is kind of how we do that. All right, next one. So what we do, we protect key habitats here on Kiawah, and we educate the public through the Shorebird Stewardship Program. So those are kind of the main things that we do to kind of address that disturbance portion. All right, next. I guess that's just a pretty picture slide. Okay, next.
We like those.
All right, so on Kiawah, we have designated 2 areas on the island as what we call critical habitat. And essentially, this is areas that we have deemed as critical habitat as defined by our ordinance, which has changed in the last 2 years. We kind of changed the way that that definition was. But it basically just means that that these areas on the ends of the islands are very important for a number of different species, including piping plover, red knots, bottlenose dolphin, and loggerhead sea turtles. And it kind of aligns with the critical habitat designation that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has as well. So in these areas, we don't allow dogs year-round at all. And as you can see, kind of with the maps here, the east end of the island, our critical habitat that we've kind of designated for that is the entire beach area east of the access point from the ocean course. And that wraps all the way around down to the Stonewall River Inlet. And on the west end, it starts at that sign. And it basically goes west down from there. So for those areas there, we don't allow dogs in those areas at all any time of year. Okay, next. And I guess one more. I'll get fancy here, I guess. So these maps are from 2024, but they didn't change from 2025, so I just kept the same graphic. During the nesting season on the west end, we kind of designate our bird nesting area. And last year, you may have noticed rope down there, we tried that. We just tried it, something new. We usually would just put signs, but we would always see footprints going in between the signs and all that. So Michael and I decided to string up thousands of feet of rope in between these signs to see if that helped. And we actually think it did. We didn't see hardly any footprints. We didn't get any reports of people walking in behind the signs. So we think that we actually kind of helped kind of keep people out of that area and allow those birds to do their thing. Unfortunately, Mother Nature had other ideas, and the birds that were nesting in there got flooded out multiple times, and we don't think anything was successful last year in that area. But we did what we could on the people side of things. All right, next one. These are the areas that we kind of roped off on the east end, or we didn't rope everything off, but we put signage. We did put some rope in the area to the west of the Ocean Course Clubhouse. That was that stretch that we were looking at, a couple years ago about, trying to limit dogs in that area because we had some birds that did nest in there. Unfortunately, we didn't have any birds that even looked like they attempted to not want to nest in there this past summer. Part of that was due to the fact that this little inlet here started to migrate way down there and started to erode a lot of the good habitat in that area. So that area that had a lot of good nesting habitat kind of got eroded away because of that. But if you've been down there in the last couple weeks, you'll probably have noticed that that little inlet that was migrating down has now filled in a little bit, and a new inlet has punched through and somewhere out in here and is now making a more direct route out. So what we're thinking now will happen is this will start to fill in a little bit more as all that pressure that was coming through and just kind of eroding that bank, well, now is forced out more of a straight line out. So so that may build back up again over the summertime, as long as, you know, things, so we'll see. Probably won't build up enough for birds to want to use it this year, but we'll see. And then we have this little stretch in the middle. That's actually the old dune ridge from when we did the beach renourishment project back in 2016, I think. And that still provides good nesting habitat. And then there's the patch, that little horseshoe shape here. This is actually blocked off here by an inlet now, so you really can't get to this without crossing water now. But that used to be our main kind of nesting area where most of the birds would nest. That has actually shrunk significantly the last couple of years, and that's because this shoal here. This is from this is an older image, but as this kind of started to attach, what happened was when it did attach, it started to then become front beach. So before, when this was kind of more out in the ocean, this was protected. So it was able to kind of build sand and build sand and build sand. But once this shoal attached here, all the energy then kind of shifted, and now that area is starting to get eroded away a little bit too. So it's gotten a lot smaller. All right, you can go to the next one. So we'll move a little bit further east, and so basically these are the three that I just showed you here. So if we move even further east, we've got this little stretch right through here where we have Wilson's plovers that are nesting. This is a really kind of a little hot spot where we get a good number of nests. It's fairly protected. There's absolutely zero way for them to get overwashed there. The dunes are much higher. This area is actually starting to build up a little bit, and it's starting to look nice, so I'm hoping maybe we'll have more birds nesting there this year. And then that little thing up in the corner there along the Stono, a couple years ago did have a couple nests in it, and we actually signed that area last winter, or last summer, because there's a lot of people that like to use that corner. And surprisingly, all the signs we put up were still there when we went to take them down. I was afraid they were all going to get kind of, used as firewood or whatever, but they didn't. So that was good. People respected the signs that use that area.
That's a pointer if you want one.
Oh, okay. Thank you. All right, we can go to the next one. Everybody probably is familiar with this, but I just wanted to kind of we do have pet restrictions on the island. I mentioned the critical habitat. No dogs are allowed in those areas year-round. That red should extend down a little bit further. We do have the dog use area there, kind of between the beach club and the ocean course. That's where dogs can be off leash year-round. And then we have our seasonal across the rest of the island in the green, and that's where from October 16th through February 28th, dogs can be off leash. But from March 1st to October 15th, they have to be on a leash during that time. Okay. All right, so now we'll kind of shift gears a little bit, and we'll go get into the birds a little bit more. So we've chosen these 5 species kind of as our focal species, and it's, I'll kind of go over the reasons why. But essentially, they're either a threatened, endangered species, or they nest on our island, so they're doing something kind of important or unique while they're here. All right, next one. We'll start with the least tern. So this is the smallest tern species that we have in North America. It's really small. This bird kind of gets here, I would say, kind of around late March, early April. And these guys are only here during the summertime. So they're here basically to do one thing, and that is to make more least terns. They nest in colonies, unlike some of our other shorebirds like oyster catchers and Wilson's plovers, which are more solitary nesters. So these guys will actually nest in larger colonies. And they do that for many reasons. The main one is, the more eyes that you have, the more you can kind of protect the colony from predation and things like that. The other part is just because of they have a very narrow kind of habitat requirement for where they like to nest. So there's only it's a very limiting kind of feature in our landscape. So they have to kind of pack into these areas. They lay their eggs directly on the sand, like most of all of our nesting shorebirds do. They have also adapted to nest on rooftops. So because of the lack of natural habitat, a lot of these least terns have found these flat roofs that have like that pea gravel on top, and that mimics similar to what they kind of like on the beach. And DNR has identified almost all of the rooftop nesting areas in the area, and they do monitoring and try to protect those nests also on the rooftops as well. This bird is a South Carolina threatened species, and we've historically had some really big colonies on Kiawah. The last ones were back in 2020 and 2021, where we had over 150 pairs nesting on the island. That was all mainly down at the east end. But unfortunately, starting in 2022, 2023, and then again last year, we did not have any birds that were successful. We had some small colonies in 2024, but none last year. All right, next slide.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Do the golfers know not to go in the dunes on the ocean course? Are there
There are signs up on the golf course now. So there's kind of a misconception about where the dunes are along the ocean course and where the golf course is. So the cart path literally is in some part of it is literally on the dune line, because there's just no other place for it to be because of erosion and things over the path. So when you see golfers that look like they're on the dunes, they probably are actually on the golf course still. When you get closer to the clubhouse, that dune field gets much wider. I'm not sure where people are kind of mainly seeing the golfers in the dunes. My guess is it's at the part closer to the beach club, that side. But the golf course is right along the beach right there. So it might look like they're in the dunes, and they are, but the golf course is also built in the dunes there. But the golf course has put signs up along that path in certain areas, just kind of telling golfers to kind of stay out of the dunes there. Whether or not that they all, they may not all obey those signs, but they have the signs are there. Okay, so this is kind of what a least tern looks like. It's our only tern that has a yellow kind of bill. Most of our other terns are going to have a black bill or an orange bill. They also have yellow legs as well, and they have this kind of white spot on the front of their head with that black cap. No other tern looks like that that we'll have on the beach, and also it's so tiny as well compared to the other terns. They're just much smaller. So again, these guys are here from the spring. This little, let's see, I use that.
Punch the little button.
All right. So each one of these slides, I have this kind of spring, summer, fall, winter, just to kind of know what to expect for seasonally when these birds are here. So in the spring and the summer, these birds are common. Most of them clear out of here in kind of mid-fall, even early fall, and we don't have any lease turns here in the wintertime. They all migrate south. All right, next slide. This is just a picture of a lease tern with its chick. That chick there is probably only a day old. Most of these species are what they call precocial. So once they hatch out of their egg, they have to be able to move within hours or else someone's going to eat them. So unlike our songbirds that lay, in a nest and their chicks have no feathers and they spend 3 weeks feeding them and growing them up to fledge, they can't do that out on the beach or else they're just they'll be eaten by things. So within hours, these chicks, they come out already kind of out of their egg, kind of in a down, and they're able to kind of run and move within hours, and kind of, they're able to then kind of hide in beach vegetation like this, and kind of then the parents will come and feed them throughout the day. All right, next. All right, so the next one we're going to talk about is the Wilson's plover. This is another South Carolina threatened species. Again, this is another bird. They nest on our beach. They lay their eggs directly on the sand, just like lease terns. The one thing that's a little different from them is they are solitary nesters, so they don't nest in colonies. But a Wilson's plover will nest in a colony of lease terns because that benefits them. But they can't tolerate, they wouldn't nest that close to other Wilson's plovers because they are territorial of their same species. So, you may have Wilson's plovers that may nest, they might be spaced out, 100 yards or so apart from each other, depending on the habitat. And again, this species is present year-round, but we have more of them here during the summertime. We do have some species, some individuals that overwinter as well, but this is kind of where that's kind of a typical Wilson's plover nest here. Generally, you're going to find their eggs or their nest kind of in among some sort of structure or vegetation, whether it be grasses or a piece of driftwood. They usually like some kind of structure next to with their eggs. We've had several nesting pairs. Back in 2024, we had a really good year. We had at least 23 pairs that nested on the island. Last year, we had a substantial number less individuals. We probably only had 12 to maybe 15 pairs last year that we could find. All right, next one. So this is kind of what these guys look like. Again, they're a small bird, about the size of, I don't know, maybe a robin, maybe even a little bit smaller than a robin. If you were to compare them to other plover species, they have kind of a bigger, large bill compared to the other plovers that we have on the island. They look very similar to a lot of the other shorebirds, kind of that brown back and that white belly. But one of the things that kind of sets them apart from sandpipers is, again, the shorter bill compared to sandpipers that have that longer pointed bill. But they have, for plovers, they have one of the longer or kind of bigger bills of the plovers. Very common here in the spring, in the summer, and in the fall, and less common in the winter. During the breeding season, they have this kind of black band here. These are both males. Females have a kind of a grayish, kind of brown tan band here. So that's how we can tell the males and females apart. They also have these kind of flesh-colored legs. So if we were to compare that to, the other plover species, semi-palmated plovers have more of an orange-colored leg, and so does piping plovers as well. So kind of one of the key features for identifying these guys is that big kind of bill and then these flesh-colored legs. All right, next. All right, so these are our Wilson's plover chicks here. You can see how they blend in pretty well here. And these guys, again, are probably only a couple of days old. And when you see them run, I mean, they can run really fast. They just kind of look like a cotton ball on sticks. And they'll just kind of get down and just kind of hide and just kind of lay down in the rack. As you can see, if they were to kind of lay down, they would blend right on in with the rack there. All right, next. So the next one is the American oyster catcher. This one is, everyone's probably seen oyster catchers if you've been on the beach. They're pretty unique in the way they look. The only other species that might look similar would be the black skimmers, but they have kind of way different bills, and although the colorations might be a little bit similar. This is a big shorebird. These guys, stand pretty tall. They're also here pretty much year-round. You can see them in the summertime in pairs. Usually you're going to see them paired up on the beaches, but outside the breeding season, you may see large flocks of oyster catchers. They congregate at the ends of the island sometimes in hundreds of individuals. Some of those are migratory birds that are moving through. Some of them might just be birds that that are resident here as well. Again, they lay their eggs directly on the sand, just like this. They're also a solitary nester, so you're not going to see groups of oyster catchers nesting together. They're going to be spaced out across the beach as well. These guys feed mainly on bivalves, as their name implies. They have their bill is kind of adapted to kind of pry open the shell and kind of snip that muscle to kind of get into the meat of those clams and oysters and things like that. We had probably 6 to 8 nests last year, and to my knowledge, I don't know if any of those were successful, as I don't recall seeing any young oyster catchers on the beach, which normally you would see because it takes them a pretty substantial amount of time to kind of grow. So they're a little bit more visible as chicks than some of the other ones. And I didn't see any juveniles last year, so I'm not sure if we had any if any of those 6 to 8 nests were actually successful last year.
Aaron, how does that compare to previous years?
It's about average.
Average?
Yeah. We don't. There's we have like one pair that tries to nest at the west end, maybe 2 depending on, but it's usually just one pair. That west end is probably big enough for one pair of oyster catchers they defend that territory. Most of the others are all down at the east end, and if you were to kind of at low tide during the summer, if you wanted to take that walk, you would walk that 4 miles from the ocean course east, and you would kind of come up on pairs of oyster catchers probably every 250 yards or so. And those are all birds that are probably defending a territory and looking to nest. So, because they defend a territory, our island can only support, a limited number of them. So that's how they kind of space themselves out on the beach. All right, so kind of what your key features on an American oyster catcher. They got this kind of black head with this bright orange bill. They've got this bright yellow orange eye ring, and then kind of a brown back with a white belly here. Again, they're pretty common all year round here. You should be able to see them almost anytime you go out on the beach if you go to the right parts. Wintertime, fall, we probably have more birds here than in the summer and spring. And that's just because they behave differently. Outside the breeding season, they flock up more in bigger groups. All right. And that's kind of, so this oyster catcher chick is probably a couple weeks old or older, so, kind of when I was saying that they're more visible on the beach, this is kind of what I'm talking about. So, usually you'll see these guys kind of out in the open. The Wilson's plovers like to hide their chicks for a long time until they look basically like the adults, and then they'll be kind of out on the beach. They like to take their chicks out into the salt marsh areas and really keep those chicks hidden. The oyster catchers typically like to show off their chicks more, so they're out and about, and they're kind of just out being seen. They're more seen when we have chicks. All right, next one. All right, so there's one more after this.
Yeah.
The red knot. Everybody's familiar with the red knot, I think by now. This is a medium-sized shorebird. This is a migrant, so it does not nest here. This bird nests up in the high Arctic regions here, and even over here in places that aren't even shown on this map. This area, so in Kiawah, it's important here because this is a major staging area for red knots through the springtime from March to May. This is a federally threatened species. Unlike the Wilson's plover and the least tern, which are state threatened, because this has the federal designation, these guys have a lot more protection than the others do, just being state threatened. A recent study that a lot of work that was done on Kiawah shows that about 17,000 red knots pass through Kiawah Island here in the spring. And that can be about 41% of the entire population of eastern red knots. So there is a western population of red knots as well that kind of uses the Pacific flyway here. So when we say 41% of the population, we're talking about the eastern red knots, the rufa, if you will. That's that population which uses the Atlantic coast. All right, so this is kind of a map that shows how red knots migrate. Okay, you can press the next one, Shep. So red knots have one of the longest migrations of any bird in the world. They can travel up to 9,000 miles from their wintering grounds at the tip of South America to their Arctic breeding grounds. So this Patagonia area down here is one of the main kind of wintering areas for red knots. The upper part of Brazil here is also another major wintering area. And then the east coast of the U.S. also supports a lot of wintering red knots. So from Kiawah all the way down to Florida as well. So all these birds then will migrate to the Arctic to breed. And they all do it through a similar route. So these birds kind of will jump from the southern tip of South America. They'll make a jump probably kind of to the northern part of South America for a stage. And they'll do this usually in one hop. So this isn't done like, they're just not meandering their way here. These birds are doing this big flight probably all in one flight. And then they have a staging area here where they'll need to fatten up again. And then their next jump is across the open ocean. And they're doing this flight also nonstop. This is several days over open ocean, flying constantly nonstop until they hit the east coast of the U.S. So for a lot of these birds, Kiawah is kind of like their second or third resting area. And then from Kiawah, or the other portions along the east coast, they are doing another staging event where they're fattening up, eating a lot of food, and then they make the next jump to their breeding grounds in the Arctic. So unlike a lot of other species that make these migrations, like songbirds that migrate at night, they're just flying for 5, 6, 8 hours, and then they rest and they eat for the day, and then they might, or 2 days, and then they might do it again. These red knots are eating a lot for a longer period of time, almost doubling their body weight while they're at these staging areas. And then they make these long, arduous flights to get to their next area. All right, next one. Yeah, I kind of already talked about that. And I talked about that. And okay, we'll get into that part. We'll get into that part later. So, okay, we can go to the next one. So this is kind of what a red knot looks like. So this time of year, we have roughly between 200 and 500 red knots here right now. Most of those are birds that probably wintered here. We might be getting some early migrants joining the flock, but majority of those are birds that probably have been here all winter long. They're a medium-sized shorebird, so they're about this, about the size of a small football, if you will. They kind of just look like almost every other shorebird on the beach, honestly. They're kind of just a grayish color, brown on top with kind of a white belly. They might have some speckling or streaking on the sides. They kind of have this kind of long, kind of pointed bill as well. Now, one thing that kind of can stand out with them and other shorebirds, comparing them to something like the bird that looks probably the most similar to a red knot would be either a short-billed dowitcher or a willet right now. They have very similar colors, pretty much identical colors, if you will. That kind of gray with that white. Their bill is a little bit smaller, obviously, than a dowitcher. A dowitcher's bill is really long and exaggerated. And a willet is just a bigger bird in general, so a willet's probably twice the size of a red knot. So the other thing that these birds do before they leave here, so not only are they here to fatten up to get to the Arctic, but they also have to look pretty. So when they get to the breeding grounds, they're in their bright plumage. So while they're here, they're eating all this food, the coquina clams and maybe some horseshoe crab eggs if they can find them. So they're putting on all this weight so that they can make these large migrations. But they also have to get the energy to replace all these body feathers. So when they get here in February and March and April, by the time they leave here, they have replaced this kind of gray plumage to this kind of red, orange color plumage. And that takes a lot of energy to replace these feathers as well. So not only do they have to put on all this fat, but they also have to replace these feathers. So they have to eat a lot of food and get a lot of nutrients and proteins and fat and everything to do this. All right, next. All right, the last species we'll talk about is the piping plover. This is a kind of a small, I say medium-sized plover here, but I would kind of say small to medium-sized plover. These guys are here mainly in the winter, although you can find piping plovers here pretty much in every month of the season, and it's mainly because of their migration. So. And I'll talk about that a little bit, but they have 3 nesting populations. So they've got an Atlantic population that nests along the northern part of the U.S. They have a Great Lakes population, which just nests along parts of Lake Superior and Lake Michigan. That population is really, really, really small. Like we're talking 100 pairs or less. Then there's this population that they call the Great Plains, which kind of doesn't nest along, it kind of nests in rivers and things like that. So, like you got kind of these large rivers like the Missouri River and things that run through these areas that have these like large sandbars in the middle. That's where these birds are nesting, is along those types of places. So some of these all these populations are threatened or endangered, and they all come and winter along the East Coast and the Gulf Coast. So they all kind of converge into this area here for the winter time. So I mentioned they're threatened. So at any given time during the winter time, you can see probably 3 to 5 piping plovers on the east end, and about 5 to 8 on the west end. That's on average, you know, year to year. You could have 10 one year, but on average, that's kind of what we have. During the peak migration, during mid-March, so as these birds are moving, you know, to their breeding grounds and moving kind of from their wintering grounds along here and in the Bahamas, I have had counts of more than 100 of them on Kiawah. And interestingly, where you normally find piping plovers in the winter on the ends, these migrants are always seen on the front beach. So, you know, you may see some on the ends, but most of these birds during migration are all seen along the surf line, along the front beach. So, so that's kind of a, you know, if you're ever out kind of mid-March and you see that's kind of that front beach area is kind of be where a lot of those migrating piping plovers are going to be. You noticed our beach kind of has those, in parts of the beach where we have those little, I don't know what to call them, little washover areas where the sand gets really bumpy. That's the zone where piping plovers like to be. So that's a good place to look for them, is where that sand gets really, it looks wet and bumpy. That's kind of where you'll find those birds during the migration time. All right, next one. So this is kind of what a piping plover looks like. So when they're here in the winter time, you know, they're going to just kind of be a light kind of tan to white overall. Their breast band is kind of pale. This bird is probably in a transition where it's kind of molting into its breeding plumage. So some of our birds here in the wintertime, you won't even see this black here or here. They're just going to be all kind of a tan or white color. Unlike, and in the wintertime, they do have a black bill, but they kind of have a yellow or orange leg here. In the wintertime, or as kind of throughout the winter and before they leave here, their bill does change color. They get more of an orange color bill and their legs brighten up a little bit as well. They'll get this black breast band and they'll get this kind of little black spot on the top of their forehead. Again, I mentioned they're very common here in the spring, in the fall, in the winter, and we will see birds here in the summer, kind of usually in July. That's usually when those birds start to come back for the wintertime. And that's because if they have a failed nest up in the breeding grounds, they generally can maybe try to re-nest. But a lot of these birds, if they have a failed nest, they just are like, all right, see ya, I'm going to start heading back, which is why we start seeing a lot of shorebird migration that starts actually in July. Unlike a lot of songbirds and other birds where you're thinking fall migration, you know, September, October, shorebirds generally will start, their migration actually starts really early, in like as early as July. And that's because a lot of where these birds are nesting, especially the ones that nest in the Arctic, it's such a small time frame that they have to nest that they don't have time to re-nest if something happens. So if their nest gets predated or it's not, they don't have time to try again. So they just leave and they start to head back. Okay, next. So this graphic is just up here to kind of show you kind of the frequency and abundance of when these focal species are here on Kiawah. The width of the lines are kind of relative to the amount of birds that are here. So as you can see, you know, I mentioned least terns aren't here in the winter, so there's no lines here. It's just kind of a nice representation of kind of those focal species and their abundance and their population numbers while they're here and when.
And
Okay.
those colors are just to distinguish among the 5 species?
That's right, yeah. Just each species is their line here and kind of how their population changes throughout the months. So just kind of go over a few other species that we have, some of the more common ones. Royal terns are a really common tern. Semi-palmated plover is probably the most common plover that we have here on the island. This is what these guys look like in the summertime. In the wintertime, they look similar, but they don't have these black breast bands and a lot of the black on their face. This is just kind of more of a white or tan color. Sanderlings, very, very common bird along the breakers, along the beach. Dunlin is probably the most common shorebird we have on the island. They don't nest here, but they're here year-round. Biggest numbers are here in the fall and the winter, where we could have up to 10,000 or more Dunlin that roost on the east end. Black-bellied plover is another very common bird that spends the winter here. We have willets as well. They also nest here. I didn't include them in the focal species because they have a little different nesting. These guys do nest on the beach front, but they also nest further back into the salt marshes and deeper into the dunes. So they're not quite as beach nesting, if you will, although some will nest on the beach, but most of them are going to be further back, and they dense in really dense cover. So like in grasses where their nest is completely covered up, and you wouldn't even really see it. And then the black skimmers as well. Okay, next. This is just kind of a list of all the.
Well, they're good, I'm done, I've done my. No, keep going.
I don't know what happened there.
That's all right. That last slide was just to show you all the different species of shorebirds that we have. So those are. Yeah, keep going back. Those are Betty's old slides.
Okay.
There's like 3 years of presentations on this one presentation. Yep, kind of going.
No, I think you,
The other way?
Yeah,
You got stuck, sorry about that.
there we go, yeah.
we blame you. We're getting there.
There it is.
Okay, stop.
Okay, so, yep, we're done with this one.
Went forwards.
This just shows all the different birds that you'd likely be able to see if you're out on the beach. I'm not gonna go through any of them. I'll give you a representation of the diversity of shorebirds that are out there. And with that, I am done, and I will turn it over to Cindy.
All
I
right.
have
Well,
one
you all saw
question.
my presentation, thank you very much, bye.
One question, kind of comment. And you're going to talk about things we can do to protect them. I'm right now working with the students on the Audubon sign contest. I've got two
Oh,
schools that I'm
yeah.
working with. And it was, I guess it shouldn't have been, but it was amazing to me. These were 4th and 5th grade students that they didn't realize they were doing any harm by running through the flocks, or if they're out there playing, they said, well, what if we're kicking a ball and it goes up there where those birds are? And I said, well, how can you fix that? Because, I was very pleased with the level of, oh, I shouldn't do that, that I saw with this younger kids. And if they learn it and have that conservation-oriented mindset, maybe their parents will too.
Thank you.
Aaron?
Yes.
The red knots, do they all come back through Kiawah, or do they go to different places? Do we see less in the fall on their return trip?
We do. So they make a similar, so there's an urgency in the springtime for these birds to all kind of get to their breeding grounds, if you will. So the reason we see these large numbers kind of more concentrated during the spring, one, is there's a predicted food source in the springtime for them in these places, so they congregate and they hit that hard. In the fall, the birds, so you'll get birds, they spread out more because, for one, some birds are successful, so they have to raise a family, others aren't, and the ones that aren't will kind of leave and start to move. But they do make a similar kind of route back through. They just do it in a more lazily way, if you will, so where they just can kind of spread out and they can take advantage of a different food source, or maybe the same food source that's just kind of spread out more. So you don't see them congregating in these local kind of pockets like you do in the springtime.
All right, I am Cindy McKinley. I am the new coordinator of the Kiawah Island Shorebird Stewardship Program. And before I forget, if you are new here and you're interested in the program, you can either email me at kshorebirds@gmail.com. I have a sign-up sheet up here. I also have some new little flyers. We're working on a new little logo for our program. The red knot in this picture is actually created by an artist who has done some work for Lisa. Yeah, so Dee gave us permission to modify hers. I'm still working on it, trying to get it a little bit more perfect. So that's a temporary
So
version
you
right
can
now.
talk to her about modifying it.
I did.
Oh, you
I
did.
did. So
Okay, all right.
we're on the right page there. But yeah, we also have flyers from Audubon, South Carolina, and I think some DNR, and also stickers and lens wipes and all sorts of things up here. So come take a look at that before you leave. But today we're going to just talk about some ways that you can help protect the birds on the beach. So I have created an acronym that might be a little corny, but I think it works really, really well, and it's how you can help share the beach with the shorebirds. And if you remember this, hopefully these points will stick in your head. Next, Shep. So the first one is S, which is steer clear of the birds. So, Aaron already pointed this out, but it is really important that we keep our distance from the birds. They are trying to either feed in order to fatten up, in order to successfully migrate or nest, or they're trying to rest, again, to successfully migrate or nest. So making them fly causes them to waste that energy that they're going to need, and we don't want them to, I don't want to say fall into the ocean on the way there, but they do need to be able to rest. Next slide. So, question for you. Who thinks the bottom picture is the appropriate behavior? That's a pretty obvious one right there. Next slide. If you get too close to the birds, you are going to cause them to spook. And I'll admit, we don't always know that. And I almost used the picture of the time I made Shep fly into a flock of birds so I could take the photo. Bike into a flock of birds, but I felt he might be a little upset if I did that. But I did, probably 6 years ago, say, oh, this would be such a great photograph, because people don't know. And once you realize it, oh, darn, I shouldn't have done that. So yeah, if you see a bunch of birds, stop, admire them if you want, or just bike around them, and you should be fine. Next one is H, heal your pets. So as Aaron mentioned, dogs, because they look like predators to the birds, and because the birds are nesting on the beach, you really need to keep your dogs a lot further away from the birds than if you were by yourself. The dogs don't need to go into the dunes to cause harm. They don't need to chase the birds to cause harm. They just need to be seen from too close of a distance. And if those birds are too upset and worried too frequently, it's going to cause them to maybe fail in their nesting or fail in their feeding. Next. So, question. Which of these two photos is modeling appropriate pet behavior when coastal birds are present? Raise your hand if you think number one is appropriate behavior. Raise your hand if you think the bottom one is appropriate behavior. Next. Actually, they both were. In this case, both photos were taken where dogs are allowed. There were no birds around these dogs. The dogs were very far from the dunes. The dogs were on leash. And it was leash season. This dog was just really happy to see me. It was chatting at me. But it looks, in the photo, you would want to say that dog is not behaving appropriately. Now, from the standpoint of maybe a dog owner, maybe they should teach their dog not to jump up at people, but that dog was doing nothing inappropriate for the birds. So both of these people were modeling appropriate behavior on the beach. Next.
Just a comment?
Yeah.
That's appropriate behavior for the dog.
Yes, too.
I mean, that's,
He was excited to see me and he wanted to talk.
so when you say, is it appropriate?
Well, yes.
Yeah.
But some people might say that's an aggressive dog, and that's that's the issue of that person, but it is not a problem for the birds because of where they were. And interestingly, that couple was headed directly for the birds. They didn't know, and I spoke with them, and they were just really interested and happy to hear about. Aaron already talked about this. I do want to say that even though your dogs can be off-leash in the blue area and certain parts of the year in the green area, if you come upon a big flock of birds, it really is a good idea to heel your dog or leash them and walk well away from the birds. Because yes, your dog is having a great time, but those birds don't know the calendar the way we do. So, you know, right now we do have these red knots that are out on the front beach. March 1st is just a couple of weeks away, but they don't know that the dogs are going to be on leash. So just heel your dog when you're near. Yeah.
Why, I have a question about why would the dog off-leash year-round area be placed right next to a critical habitat area? Why wouldn't it have been like someplace in the green?
That's a question that Aaron may or may not want to
Yeah.
answer.
I can. So that was done a long time ago. And I don't know if you remember, but we used to have dogs used to be able to be off leash year-round here, right? And we had a lot of issues with outside of dogs and wildlife, but it was just because this was a county park, this area turned into like an area where there was just a lot of dogs. We had people being bitten, things like that. So when we, when the town at that time decided to kind of change that, we kind of had to come up with another area, and that was the compromise. And the reason we chose this area here was, if I remember right, it was because there's no homes out in front of this area. So it wouldn't be necessarily fair, potentially, I think was the thinking, to put a dog off leash area in front of an area in front of people's like boardwalks and things. So the area here between this ocean course where it's just a golf course was kind of the reason why that area was chosen. So that's kind of the reason.
Admire from afar. So we had this, the S was steer clear of birds. This is very similar. You should admire those beachfront birds from afar, but this is also talking about the nesting birds. Because they are nesting in the sand and in the dunes, you really can't see them. If you were, you're not supposed to go in the dunes, but if you were to go near the dunes, it would be too late by the time you got there. Aaron didn't mention, but because these birds are nesting in the sand, unlike songbirds, they're not trying to warm the eggs, they're actually trying to protect them from the sun. So if those birds are spooked and fly away, within a few minutes, depending on the time of year, those eggs or those chicks could overheat and die. And we even, when we were training a couple years ago, I remember someone asking, if there's trash in the dunes or balloon in the dunes, can I go in there and get that? And Aaron said, absolutely not. Aaron and his staff are the only ones, because they're the only ones that would be able to actually tell where those nests are. So it's just really important for you to admire. If you see chicks, or usually what you're going to see are the parents flying to a nest feeding. Don't get too close because you will spook them. Next. All right, well, Aaron already blew this one for me, but I was going to ask, here was my question, can you find a chick? And next. And as we know, there's actually two. So they see how well they blend in. I mean, you're not going to see them at all. And again, dogs should be further away. So if you see those signs, your dog should be even further away, which makes it tricky, I know, at high tide. If you're walking the beach or you have an off-leash dog in that blue area at high tide. But really do try to stay as far away as you can from the signs. Next. Okay, the R would be respect posted signs, so we pretty much talked about this already, but a lot of people do not see that sign, the no dogs sign, especially when they're enjoying the beach and they're running along the water. So you all now know this because you know the sign is there, but if you do come upon other people out there with their dogs, it isn't inappropriate for you to at least let them know. You can even tell them, you know, I don't want your vacation to get ruined by a ticket from Beach Patrol. You don't need to yell at anybody or try to enforce it, but just let them know, you know, the reasoning for, and it's always a good idea for people to understand why. The reason dogs aren't allowed here, in addition to the dolphins, is because of so many of the birds are roosting on the ends of the island, especially at high tide. They're getting away from the people and they're having a place to hang out without being disturbed. And the same thing with the seasonal nesting signs that Aaron already talked about. Next. And then the last one is the E, educate others. So if you can share what you've learned today with other people, then more people are going to know ways to protect the birds. Next one. So the last way you can help is to join our program if you want to. It really is a fun group of people. We went out yesterday. There were 18, I think, of us maybe out on the beach yesterday, and we just had a blast looking at the birds, learning so much. Next. So we have two goals. One, and then now I realize, so I'm learning so much too. Shorebirds, I guess, have not declined over 70%, but 70% of the shorebirds have declined over the past 40 years. So I think I need to tweak that a little bit. But as Aaron pointed out, shorebird stewardship programs really do make a difference. And so what we're trying to do is protect the birds and then educate other people. And it's really important for you to know that you do not need to know the birds. You don't have to be able to identify birds. I am slowly learning my birds. What you need to know is why they need to be protected and how we can protect them. And then as you go along, you're going to learn more about them and learn how to identify them. I've been creating online lessons. We have a Facebook page where we share pictures. You know, what is this bird? One person might explain, well, this is how you know it's a dowitch, or this is how you know this is a specific tern. And we are all learning together. When we do our walks together, that's what we're all doing, is learning about the birds. So you do not need to be a bird expert. You don't even have to be a bird lover because you'll become one. I honestly joined this program just so I could meet some people, and now I'm a bird lover. So it'll happen.
She's in charge of the program.
So if you want to start off slowly, this season is the one to do, because you can just learn about the red knots and focus on that. And you can do like I did the first 2 years, at least twice, telling someone all about this group of birds out there and the red knots, and at some point going, those aren't red knots. But I'll tell you about them anyway, because at some point, especially early in the season, it's so hard to tell them apart. But I've learned now, when you see a large group of the sandpiper-looking birds, that's probably red knots. And so then, as the season goes on, once we get into like April and May, you won't be able to confuse them with any other bird. You got the different seasons. So the fall, it's a little confusing how this is our kickoff, but actually our year started in fall. That's because of the way Audubon does they count our hours in July. So I run from August through July, but the fall winter migration season, and then our red knot spring season, that of course red knots are not the only birds that are coming through here in the spring, and the nesting season. And you do not need to sign up for all 3 seasons. You can just choose one, say, I'm gonna try this out and see if I like this. Next. So I'm gonna go through this one really quickly because Aaron's kind of talked about this. But our stewarding goals for the red knots really are just to help protect the birds so that they can migrate successfully. So we're educating the public about them. We're asking people to give them a wide berth. Next. The nesting season is a very, because the nesting is usually on the ends of the island, typically on the east end. So that's one where you tend to just go and either set up a chair near the ocean course which is not a horrible place to go hang out for the day. Or you can walk up and down if you can get across. And just there's usually very few people out there, and there are very few dogs that go beyond that area. So it's just sort of an educational opportunity. And then fall migration season, that's actually a fun time you see a lot of different birds then. And again, fewer people, it's not as hot, so it's very relaxed. And we have two different ways that you can steward. So one way is to actually go out on the beach, and so you can be walking around, taking your binoculars. We have laminated materials like these that I have for each season, so that you have like your little cheat sheets, and you can just tell people about the birds that you're seeing, giving them an opportunity to look through your binoculars, or just protecting the birds in general, maybe going down to the spit and making sure that people aren't chasing them. And I think my next one is the tabling one, right? Nope, go back. Well, we can sit here. The other way is tabling, and this is something that I started last year, but we have a dog box at Beachwalker Park. It has a lot of supplies in it, a lot of this sort of stuff, and I have a little red mat stamp you can put on the children's hands. We have a big horseshoe crab that really gets their attention. And people, as they go through Beachwalker Park, especially if you're sitting at the picnic table by the snack bars, they're always like so excited. Oh my gosh, the naturalists are here again, maybe, and it really adds to their day, and they're all really excited. And it's a really great way to table if you have mobility issues, if you don't really feel comfortable approaching people on the beach. I mean, a lot of us don't, and so this is a good way to share the information without having to go out there. And you can talk about the red knots even when the red knots aren't here. So any time of year you can be tabling and telling people about the piping plovers that are going to come here in the fall, and how we have the little bands on them, and you can actually find out who raised that bird and where it came from, and that its sibling went to Mexico. This is all stuff we just learned about one of the piping plovers that's here right now. Next. And even though you are stewarding typically on your own, we're trying to create more social opportunities. So the bird walks that we do are really, really fun. We occasionally go to people's homes. We went to Steen's house to see the spoonbills. I'm going to try to do a kayaking expedition from my house to go see the whimbrel flying down Bohicket Creek this spring. The Earth Day Festival is always lots of fun, and I'm always looking for volunteers for that. Shorebird Festival Week is coming up. They're going to have shorebird trivia at the brewery, and did we win first place, or do you remember? Second place? Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. And I knew nothing about birds, but we got the song, so we did well with that. And we have a great celebration at the end of the year. Next. So the biggest thing about us that is different than probably any other volunteer group that you've done is that you do not sign up for shifts.
Just go.
And Betty started doing this because she found more people were willing to actually steward if they didn't have to sign up for a shift. I find that it's really, really great idea, honestly, because Turtle Patrol, they need someone every morning to go count those nests. We just need someone to try to be out there and talk to people and try to find the birds if you can, because they're up and down the beach. If I said we have a 2-hour shift at Boardwalk 1, doesn't mean the birds are going to be there. So if you're going out to the beach, you want to go for a walk, take some of your stewarding supplies, wear your vest, talk to a couple of people, and then submit your hours on your phone, really simple. And that's really all there is to it. If you sign up, I'll be sending you an email with some online training. I'm making these new lessons. You guys are going to be my guinea pigs, because I've made some videos and lessons to train you on how to be a steward. Then you can have an opportunity to come join us on the beach and kind of learn it in real time. You can pick up your materials at Town Hall at a specific time. And we just ask, because it is a lot of work to make all of these things and to buy your vests, that you commit to doing 6 hours, which honestly, is easy peasy, especially if you do one of our bird walks. Those are usually 2 hours long right there, so. Next. And that's pretty much it. So if you're interested, you can email me, you can sign up here. Please, before you leave, take any of these fun little things that we have. And if you have any questions, you can talk to me. I know this went really long, so you can talk to me afterwards. Raise your hand if you're a current steward. So I just put them on you can talk to them too, because they're here too. So if you have any questions, they'll give you the truth of how it is. But I appreciate you coming out. I really hope that you guys share the beach with the birds.
Do you want texting communication?
The texting thing I will do with the training. There's no point
Okay,
in bringing
I just
that up.
think people
Yeah.
might like to know how that works.
Yeah, that's something that, we do a little text group with the Red Knots for people who want to do it, but that's more a training thing. Thank you, though. All right, any pressing questions that you'd like to share with the group? Otherwise, you can just come a text.
Cindy, what do we say of the distance? What is a good distance to keep the bird? Are we still saying 60 feet?
Say 25 yards.
It can be different
All right.
between the seasons, because birds tolerate different things, different times of year. So you almost have to read the bird's body language. So if you notice that birds that are normal, if you are altering the bird's current behavior in any way, then you're probably too close. So like if birds are feeding and they don't but then if they all of a sudden they start to say stop and they're like this, that's probably the point. But it could be different with a red knot than it could be with a piping plover. You could walk up to a piping plover pretty close and they don't really care that you're there. So it's really kind of, it's teaching people how to read bird behavior a little bit is part of it. And the easiest thing is if a bird changes its normal behavior, that's probably the point of when you're too close.
One thing too is, just to add to that, when the red knots are here, when they're first here, they're focused on, let's eat, let's do this, but as they're getting closer to their migration, they get really skittish. So when I'm in the beach, when they're getting ready to leave, there's always a lot of people on the beach because it's, mid-May, and we always have a lot of people during that time. But, and bicycles are a big thing too. So it's like, they don't know what a bicycle is, right? And so it's almost like bicyclists need to stay further away than people just walking. And, those are the kind of things that you don't really think about, but once you've been doing shorebirding for a while, you can say, oh, this is a 50-yard day for these birds.
Yeah, there's like I said, yeah, it's really not there's not a one-size-fits-all distance, but it's a hard one to kind of pinpoint down.
All right, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.